get ready for more freaky content. It's like this.
I knew the first day something was in the house.
Feels like something you can't argue against it. It's just fact. It's in your face. Everyone's going.
I've tried to rent it out, and nobody stays here long.
I feel like when I'm in here, it's very depressing. It's a depressing place to be.
This house was so active. It was men, women. You could hear the children. You could hear them running about upstairs. You could hear them talking. You could hear them laughing. You could hear women talking.
My fascination with this story all began with a viral ghost investigation clip. I'm sure many of you have seen it. A group of investigators stood around a table in a small room, cameras streaming to a monitor in the other room that allowed the other investigators to watch what was going on. To their surprise, they witnessed something extremely unusual. Their co-investigator Debbie was taking part in a seance. When it appeared, her face began to change. Only for a few moments, but it looked as if her face was transformed. Her mouth stretched out to a disturbing degree. Her eyes darkened. It seemingly freaked the investigators out enough that they pulled her out of the room. And according to one study on the location I read, left soon after, packing up their gear outside the property to avoid spending more time inside than they needed to. While I am skeptical about what we are seeing in this clip, it is captivating and damn creepy to say the least. 12 months after seeing this clip for the first time, I was having a weekend away in a small seaside resort in Essex, when I discovered, while researching the local area, that there was a house nearby that is often described as the most haunted in the UK, the same house that clip had been filmed in. So why not go take a look, even if it was just from the outside? There, I got to see the cage, a former holding cell that was famously used to house witches before being taken to trial. That has curiously been converted into a small cottage, a quite unique situation. This sent me down a rabbit hole, and I've been waiting to bring you this story for about 6 months now. It's a story of dark local history, of a genuinely terrifying haunting, of paranormal investigators. A story that not everyone would survive. So get yourself a warm drink, dim the lights, and get comfortable. It's time to delve into the disturbing story of the cage. Football.com is your playground. Of the cage.
It's a beautiful little cottage, and it's got the old prison door, and it's a little slice of English history.
The bulk of our story tonight takes place in the mid-2000s. But to get a better understanding of what's going on here, we need to go a long way back, to 1582. Sentosa is a relatively small, unassuming village, but as with much of Essex, the dark shadow of the witch trials hangs over it. This was an area of the country that the Witchfinder General himself, Matthew Hopkins, was very active in. Across Essex, it is estimated that around 1,000 people were accused of witchcraft during this time. Arguably the most famous of which is the story of Ursula Kemp. Ursula was a 27-year-old woman, born in Sentosa, where she lived with her 8-year-old son Tom. She had separated from the boy's father and was raising him alone, making ends meet by being a midwife and wet nurse to the other women in the village. She was also a cunning woman. After falling sick herself previously, she had learned about natural remedies and folk magic from another woman and began using these practices herself. One day, a woman named Grace came to visit Ursula and asked her to help her ill son, which she did, gladly and for free. The boy made a full recovery. However, shortly after this, Grace herself would fall ill. She made an agreement with Ursula. She would pay her to cure her. But once cured, she told Ursula that she couldn't afford it. Not long after this, Grace's 3-month-old daughter fell from her cot, breaking her neck. Then both Grace and her son became ill again. All of this Grace saw as the work of Ursula. Ursula was accused of witchcraft and arrested on the 20th of February 1582. She was thrown into the cage, a small holding cell in the village. She was repeatedly interrogated, as was her 8-year-old son. After some time, it is claimed that Ursula admitted to having 4 familiars and that she sent one to kill the baby. She also then apparently went on to incriminate 12 other women in the village for similar practices who would all join her in the cage as they awaited trial. When she was finally taken to trial in late March of that year, after over a month of interrogation and being held in cramped cells, Ursula would suffer one final heartbreak. Her son Tom was the first witness at her trial. The young boy claimed that his mother was in fact a witch and did have 4 familiars that on occasion he had seen sucking blood from her. Ursula Kemp, along with 6 of the other women who had been accused, were hanged. Her body apparently returned to St. Osoph, where she was buried in a seemingly unmarked grave. The cage where they had been kept continued to be used as a holding cell for the area until the early 1900s. Next to it, a small cottage was built sometime in the 1800s, and at some point in the 1970s, these 2 buildings were connected, creating the odd scenario of a cottage with a modern extension on the first floor, with a literal prison as one of the downstairs rooms, the chain still on the wall, and a plaque on the outside, marking it out for all those who would enter, as the former site that the legendary Ursula Kemp was kept. Little did anyone know what combining these 2 buildings would unleash. The bulk of the information about the haunting of the cage comes from a woman who purchased the property in 2004. But she has been able to fill in a few details about the previous residents. It appears no one keeps ownership of the cage for very long. On average, the property was sold every 3 to 4 years prior to the purchase in 2004, including one strange incident where the property was sold for £150 and then put back on the market just weeks later for £100, a loss that in today's money would be tens of thousands of pounds. What we do know is that a young couple who lived there in the 1990s reported strange goings-on, including one evening where they had friends over to visit. The evening had been totally normal, but then suddenly they all heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. They rushed up and found all the books that had been on a bookcase on the upstairs landing had been thrown all across the floor. The bookcase itself was standing, totally intact. On another evening, the woman who lived in the house at the time claimed that she got into bed when she felt something climb onto the bed and snuggle into her. She thought it felt like a child. In 2004, the property would be purchased by Vanessa Mitchell. Vanessa had grown up in St. Osoph, but had spent a good chunk of her life living abroad. She had decided to move back to her childhood village and was delighted to discover that the cage was up for sale. This was a property she had been fascinated with since she was a kid. The plaque on the outside sharing its history was burned into her imagination as a child. She had heard rumours that it was haunted, but that didn't put Vanessa off. In fact, she was very open to the idea of the paranormal. Vanessa claims that she's been able to see ghosts her entire life, but that this has never caused her any real concern. Vanessa would later go on to claim that she believed the cage chose her to live there. Despite its many shortcomings as a home, she felt this unrelenting desire to purchase the cottage. The fact that its previous owner had hung himself inside the property only 1 year earlier did nothing to stop this dream becoming a reality. The home is tiny, made up of the original holding cell, the small reception room, kitchen. Then there are stairs that are closed off by a door, with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. Behind the property is a pathway that is referred to by locals as Coffin Alley. This is down to the fact that it used to be used back in the day to carry coffins up to the nearby graveyard. Shortly after purchasing the cage, Vanessa moved in with her childhood friend Nicole. It wouldn't be long before she would have her first experience in the home. They had unpacked a few essentials, and Vanessa was stood in the kitchen alone, glancing out the window to Coffin Alley, thinking about how lucky she was to finally call this place her home, when she heard something. Footsteps coming from behind her. She didn't think anything of it at first, simply assuming it was Nicole entering the kitchen. But when she turned to greet her now housemate, she was stunned by what she saw. There, right behind her, stood a tall, shadowy figure. She described it as being human-like in shape, but the edges were all blurred. Standing around 6 feet tall, with what she claimed looked like the build of a man, Vanessa was frozen to the spot. Again, she had experienced what she believed to be paranormal sightings throughout her life, but not like this. Not so close and in broad daylight. Whatever this was also blocking her only means of escape. It was just standing there in the doorway, staring directly at her. If you could call it staring. It didn't have any facial features. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few seconds, the figure appeared to turn and began walking to the living room. As it did, the shadow slowly began to fade away, until it was just gone. That was when she spotted Nicole through the window. She had been outside unloading the car the whole time. The shadow man would go on to become a regular visitor in the cage. But at least at this time, Vanessa decided not to tell Nicole about it. Nicole was due to have surgery soon. She had cancer, and her coming to live with Vanessa was supposed to be an opportunity for her to rest as she prepared to battle the illness. Vanessa didn't want to ruin that by telling her that they might have at least one additional housemate. A few weeks passed and not a lot had happened. But then Vanessa made another strange discovery in the kitchen. She had once again walked in to make a cup of tea, when she saw, lying there on the kitchen counter, a piece of paper. It looked perfect.
From electronics, cosmetics, home appliances, you need it, Mano has it delivered in minutes.
It was a tense scene in the city of Culiacan, Mexico, as a group of officers surrounded a home with their weapons drawn, and that tension was more than justified, as the officers were soon to become part of history, taking down one of the most notorious criminals in the region, a man named Ovidio Guzman Lopez, the son of Joaquin Guzman, also known as El Chapo.
There he is, the man known as El Chapo, finally back in custody after 13 years on the run since bribing his way out of prison.
Despite his father having been arrested back in 2014, Ovidio was still a free man, continuing his father's legacy by taking a lead role in the cartel. But this day was set to be his last as a free man, as officers prepared to enter the home and detain Ovidio. The sting itself was supposedly set up by the Mexican government as a way to halt the cartel's reign over the region. And for the cops partaking in this daring moment, they were set to be heroes should it all go off without a hitch. And that day, that's exactly what would happen, as Ovidio was taken into custody and the scene was secured without a single shot being fired, making what should have been a huge win for the Mexican government, had the story ended there.
The city of Culiacan, Mexico, the historic homeland to the violent Sinaloa drug cartel, turned into a battle zone Thursday.
The city quickly became a war zone, with the cartel sending over 700 armed soldiers in retaliation against the arrest of Ovidio, all despite the fact that officers had actually made Ovidio call off any such actions by the cartel, as shown in the end of this body cam footage, though they refused to listen. And within hours, the military in the region was completely overwhelmed. And with the city in absolute chaos and countless fatalities looming in the distance, the Mexican government would make a shocking decision to allow Ovidio Guzman to walk free. The move was stunning, though it did immediately quell the fighting in the region, and for a moment, all seemed calm. Though in the minds of the cartel members, things were nowhere near even. Which brings us back to this video. In it, we see multiple officers taking part in the operation, with the leader of it all being a man named Eduardo. And though these officers likely thought that their actions that day would make them heroes, this decision would instead make them hunted. Just days after the botched arrest, Eduardo would be stalked and confronted by armed members of the cartel, who would open fire in a hailstorm of bullets when the man was in his car. In total, 155 shots were fired at Eduardo, who never stood a chance. And the horrors of this video don't end there, as despite Eduardo being the only officially confirmed death of all of these officers, it has been heavily rumored that in the time since the recording, every single one of the officers seen in this clip have since been killed, as they became the cartel's easiest form of revenge against the police, being picked off one by one to send a message to the whole world. And watching this clip back and seeing just how calm Ovidio was during his arrest, I have to believe that he knew that this was going to happen. And though he was the one being arrested, it really seemed like it was the police that had fallen into his trap, making this yet another example of the disturbed content found across the depths of YouTube. Depths in which today we are yet again diving into, as we look to discover more of YouTube's darkest videos.
Again, to all my friends, I'm glad you came to play. Our fun and learning never end. Here's what we did today.
I just have a couple questions for you.
Here we are again, Reed, and there's no place that I'd rather be because the Christmas spirit here is just unbelievable.
Since its inception, YouTube has been used as a launching ground for aspiring performers to have their work noticed by the masses. But for every success story you see across the site, there are hundreds of thousands of others who will land well short of achieving that fame. And lost in the crowd of these nameless faces was an aspiring rapper named Mathboy Fly. His real name is Darrell Brooks, a now 39-year-old man who had spent most of his life on the wrong side of the law. At the age of just 17, he would pick up his first felony for battery, and from there, he would never really get his life back on track, picking up fresh charges on a regular basis. By 2007, Darrell's life was in a total freefall, as he had become addicted to meth, while picking up his most serious conviction yet for rape against a minor, which not only landed him in prison, but it also landed him on the sex offender registry. Clearly, Darrell was a disturbed man, dealing with some extremely dark personal demons, which just so happened to be captured by a film crew who at the time were documenting the struggles of meth addiction. The movie's name is Crystal Darkness, and in it we see a short segment showing Darrell in prison, sharing how he had abandoned his kid due to his addiction, while expressing regret that he couldn't give his child a better life.
You know, I got this beautiful kid who's going without my time. I thought I would just be this wonderful father, just be the greatest dad ever. I'm gonna give him everything that I didn't have. But then it's like reality set in.
In an interview years later, the director of the project, a man named Logan Needham, described Darrell as seemingly genuine in his pursuit to turn his life around, stating, "I felt like he definitely had remorse, and I think he felt bad about the decisions he had made to land him where he was." However, Darrell would never turn this new leaf. and once he was released, his dangerous behavior only got worse, as time and time again he would find himself back behind bars, facing charges like strangulation, domestic abuse, and bail jumping. Though he didn't let these endless legal troubles get in the way of his one true dream, a dream that he believed would finally bring him some semblance of success in this world, with that being to become a famous rapper. And so he took on the nickname Mathboy Fly and began posting his music to YouTube, where we find what would one day become one of the darkest videos on the site.
I just got a load worth about a half a ticket. 30 in the blicker when I'm out here chasing chicken. Was observant to the game when I used to play the benches. Now I swipe the bench, you got 'em looking at me different.
The video was posted back in the summer of 2018 and featured Daryl's song, Half a Ticket. The video features a lot of your standard music video visuals, though ultimately nothing really stands out all that much upon first viewing, aside from how bad it sounds. But today, this clip is viewed in a far different manner. Around the time of its release, something was brewing inside of Daryl. His life was at a dead end and he knew it, leading to his violent temper growing worse and worse by the day. In 2020, Daryl would be arrested for firing a shot at his nephew during an argument, and though the bullet thankfully missed the man, Daryl would still be faced with 10 years in prison, as police discovered that the gun he had used was actually stolen, along with a large amount of meth being found in Daryl's pocket, which all culminated into the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence. Though due to issues with the pandemic, Daryl would eventually be allowed to leave police custody, as his bail had been reduced to just $500. Unsurprisingly, this would further enable Daryl's behavior, and the following year he would yet again be arrested. In this particular case, Daryl had been in his car stalking his ex-girlfriend, who was also the mother of his child, before pulling up alongside her and demanding that she get in. Concerned for her safety, the woman refused to enter the car, to which Daryl reacted by running her over. Thankfully, this woman too would survive the ordeal, though shockingly, despite Daryl's constant run-ins with the law, as well as this crime having taken place when he was literally already on bail, he would yet again avoid jail time, as his bail was in this case set at just $1,000. Free again, Daryl likely began to think that he was above the law, which paired with his escalating anger would unsurprisingly lead to one more violent outburst. Though what was surprising was just how violent it would be. On November 21st, 2021, days after Daryl's most recent arrest, police would be called to the home of his ex-girlfriend, as they had yet again gotten into another dispute. But this time, before things had gotten too far out of hand, Daryl stormed out, got into his car, and drove away. Though rather than this being some sign of restraint, this was instead seemingly part of a far more malicious decision, leading to one devastating event. That day, Daryl Brooks would drive his car directly into the annual Waukesha Christmas Parade at speeds of over 40 miles per hour, driving in a zigzag pattern in an attempt to strike as many people as possible, none of whom Daryl had known personally, as this was simply an act of pure rage. The videos of this event and its aftermath are brutal, and it's something that I'm not allowed to fully show here, but in total, 62 people were struck, most of whom were children or senior citizens who were just trying to enjoy this beloved community celebration. And of these victims, sadly, 6 would perish. Following the tragedy, Daryl attempted to flee the area, even begging a stranger to let him into his home and to order him an Uber, which would be caught on a Ring doorbell camera, though he would quickly be captured by police soon after, and is now facing a whopping 77 charges. And despite the leniency he's enjoyed from the court system over the years, it seems that this time, the judge will not show him that same type of mercy.
I wasn't a human anymore. I was just something vile, disgusting, despicable. I can go on. I can use a lot of words, but that's what I became. It's really what I became.
Knowing what Daryl has become and watching this documentary back with this context makes it a truly haunting watch, as no one involved, not even Daryl himself, knew just how bad things would one day become. But there is a reason that I mentioned this seemingly obscure music video as being one of the darkest videos on the site, and it's for a reason that is very easy to look right over.
I just got a load worth about a half a ticket.
As Daryl is shown rapping in the video, within its background, we can see a red SUV. The same SUV that just a few years later would bring chaos, pain, and despair to a local parade, and ultimately end the lives of so many innocent people.
You've had a great time.
Here's how many hours I spent watching videos on social network last year for free.
Innocent people.
We've had a great time, haven't we? That's right. Santa's out there with a lot of cheer and goodwill.
Families can have lots of fun together, but sometimes we get angry at our brother.
Our next video takes us all the way around the world to a little-known village in northeastern Somalia called Halam. In October of 2021, a video from the region began circulating across the web, showcasing what appears to be an unremarkable scene playing out, as two men from the village were being interviewed separately. As one of the men is seen talking, a few individuals appear behind him, looking as if they were preparing for some sort of event, or perhaps just doing some farming. Given the language barrier and a lack of translation included, it's impossible to tell what these men are discussing upon an initial watch, and given just how normal it all seems, it offers little reason to be dove into any further, had it not been for two bizarre details. For starters, the thumbnail is quite unusual, as it shows a man who is not featured within the video, tied up and clearly looking upset, while one of the men who is being interviewed is shown standing proudly alongside him. Making things even stranger, the title, which is written in Somali, translates to the fairly disturbing line, "Garo, the killer of his mother, was shot dead today." Despite things appearing unremarkable in the video itself, the thumbnail and the title alone were enough to pique the interest of a select few who just so happened to stumble upon this practically unknown upload. And those who chose to dig any deeper would be greeted with the true horrors of the scene playing out before them. Upon performing a general Google search of the video's title, users will be greeted with a plethora of uploads featuring footage of the same event, one of which even showing footage of the man in the blue shirt tied up with his head down.
tobankii bishii toddobaad 2020 xukun dil ah ku riday Faarax Cabdi Maxamed oo hooyadiis ku dilay Tuula Jaram ee gobolka Nugaal waxaana dilka geystay 17kii bishii 6 2020.
And the results didn't stop there, as searching the title would also lead to the discovery of a multitude of articles that also depict this very event that we see unfolding, which would ultimately add clarity to the situation, as it was revealed that this bound man shown in the footage and the thumbnail was actually a cold-blooded killer. His name is Farah Abdi Mohammed, and during that previous summer, he had apparently fallen into what was described as a drug-fueled rage, which would ultimately end with him taking the life of his very own mother. And making matters even more tragic, he was one of 7 siblings, meaning that 6 other individuals had lost their mother thanks to this man's disturbed behavior. The case went unnoticed by most outside media outlets, though within this small village, it sent ripples across the community, as his crime was so heinous and his guilt was unquestionable. And with Farah quickly landing in custody, the question was then posed, what do we do with him now? Would prison really be enough of a punishment for this individual, or should he face the death penalty? Ultimately, authorities would leave this decision to the remaining siblings of Farah, who would be tasked with determining his fate. And it was from these discussions that Farah's brother, a man named Awai, would come forward with the decision that Farah should suffer the same fate as their mother did, and that he should face execution. Though this wasn't all Awai had to say, as his decision came with an interesting proposal. He wanted to make a spectacle of the execution and send a message all across the region that those who take the lives of their mothers will have their own lives taken in return. And so, to assure that this was seen by the masses and to prove just how serious Awai was with his message, he would request to be the executioner. So on October 17th, 2021, news cameras gathered in the town as Awai was interviewed in preparation to take the life of his own brother and the killer of his mother, as he's seen here even posing alongside Farah just moments before the execution. The situation is almost impossibly grim, and to make things just that much darker, those men seen working in the background of Awai's interview were in fact helping to set up for the event, or at least the aftermath of it, as in actuality, they were quite literally digging Farah's grave right behind his own brother, with Farah watching it all happen just off camera. And so in the moments following this footage, Awai was handed a gun, which he would press against the head of his brother Farah and pull the trigger. The layers to this clip are almost incomprehensible, especially considering how calm everyone seems in the minutes leading to this execution. I mean, even Farah, whose life was soon to end, seemed to show no panic whatsoever, despite his grave literally being dug right before his eyes. Yet no one seemed to show any sort of emotion. It's almost like everyone understood their roles and accepted what needed to be done, leading to this one unconventional, yet almost indescribably disturbing video.
We'll show you how to make all kinds of delicious things to eat.
This video is sponsored by HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a service that sends fresh, pre-portioned ingredients along with delicious recipes directly to your house. These recipes are incredibly diverse, with the chefs over at HelloFresh providing you with great seasonal spring recipes like sweet heat shrimp tempura bowls, garden spinach ricotta ravioli, and one-pot creamy lemon dill chicken soup. On top of all that, these recipes require hardly any prep time at all and make cleanup easier than ever, while also being up to 72% cheaper than dining out at a restaurant. So overall, you're saving a ton of time with cooking alone, and even some money too. But for me, the best part of this service is that I can finally stop worrying about what I'm going to be eating for dinner. I mean, that's something I spend so much time overthinking about, but with HelloFresh, I can avoid that daily dilemma for good, as they offer a whopping 50 weekly meal options that I can select from all in advance. So if this is HelloFresh,
God who created these bodies of ours, and it's God who blesses them, and with his help, keep these bodies
Working in optimum condition.
February 13th, 2014, a man named Kevin Bennett approaches a busy intersection on his way to work in the city of Hampton, Missouri. The morning commute had gone just like any other. Typical traffic, fair weather, and on the corner of the intersection, a man was dancing. He was a well-known figure in the area, or at least his performances were, as virtually every morning he would be there, not saying a word, not begging for money, just simply dancing. Like many others, Kevin found the man to be uniquely charming, and so he decided to film that morning's performance and post it to YouTube for others to see.
Dance, man. After this morning.
The video was met with over 10,000 views and even led to a mention in the local news reports, as collectively the community wanted to know who exactly this man was. No one knew it then, but this man's name is actually Seth Herder, and what they were witnessing wasn't some type of light-hearted dance routine, but rather the deterioration of a man's mind. which was playing out in real time.
Hi everyone, my name's Seth Herder.
At the time, Seth was an unemployed man in his late 20s who had been struggling with multiple psychological conditions, leading to his behavior becoming somewhat erratic as time passed. This was cataloged throughout his frequent postings across the web, where he would type bizarre religious ramblings claiming that Jesus would soon be returning to Earth alongside intergalactic beings. But sifting through countless posts of this same vein, Seth actually mentioned his daily dance routine on a few separate occasions, referring to it not just as a performance, but also as some sort of religious ritual that he was using to spread his message. And though this message was never expressly stated, most would assume that it was based around the idea of peace, as he would often say things like, "I love all beings forever, and seek never to kill, nor harm, nor destroy any living thing, no tree, nor bird, nor bee, nor dragonfly." However, as time passed, he would slowly drift away from this particular belief. Throughout much of Seth's adult life, he struggled to hold down consistent residency, being evicted time and time again for things such as noise complaints and heavy smoking. And by 2018, Seth had again found himself moving into a brand new apartment, and it was within those walls that his behavior would take a troubling turn. Almost immediately, neighbors in his complex began complaining about Seth's behavior, stating that he had been seen multiple times running down the hallway over and over again with a katana in his hand. Even more bizarrely, others claimed to have seen him standing behind the apartment building, alone in the dead of night, standing there in complete darkness, brandishing his sword and just dancing, alone in the dark, for hours and hours on end, with him appearing to be in some sort of trance-like state, completely unresponsive to the world around him. And his behavior didn't stop there, as seemingly out of the blue, Seth began verbally harassing his neighbors and starting fights over seemingly nothing at all, where he was said to have displayed a genuine and even frightening anger that seemed to be growing more and more uncontrollable. Though it's hard to say for sure what exactly was on Seth's mind during this time, as he had abandoned all of his social media in the years prior, leaving what had once been his daily blog and his Twitter account completely dormant, and practically stopping his trail across the entire internet, with the exception of one site. As for whatever reason, Seth seemed to take a liking to one unique platform during all of this, with that site being Amazon. Seth was an avid reviewer across Amazon, leaving his thoughts on the various religious texts and tokens that he had purchased prior to the height of his manic episodes, which is all fine and well, but starting in 2018, his purchases and reviews began to grow worrisome. For instance, in March of that year, Seth had purchased and reviewed a pair of industrial-strength metal handcuffs, which he reviewed by saying, "Strong metal, good case, be careful." On another occasion, he had purchased a set of knives, throwing blades, and his katana that he had used multiple times across his apartment building, referring to the sword as amazing, stating that, "For $20, it really is an excellent blade. I am very impressed with the quality. The tip was razor sharp and easily capable of penetrating most targets I put it up against. Once again, a great purchase for $20, very capable of killing. It is a fighting blade for sure." The post was also accompanied by a photo of himself with the weapon in his hand. There are some definite red flags here in his reviews, but the most disturbing example of all would come just a month later, as Seth would describe his experience with a specific taser that he had purchased by saying, "I bought this exact stun gun model. In a fit of rage, I shocked myself in the face and neck about 30 times with the unit. It left visible welts on my chest and neck. The stun gun is effective. It has a loud audible snap that really goes straight to the dark parts of someone's psyche. It really is a potent psychological defense weapon." He then followed up this post by saying that shocking himself was exhilarating to say the least. The items in which Seth had been purchasing, and the subsequent reviews he had left for them, were clearly very concerning. But for those who knew him personally, things were actually becoming even more frightening. As around this time, Seth would call his father to explain that Jesus had spoken to him and had selected him to carry out certain tasks, claiming that he was the chosen one and that it was time to start punishing people. Seth's father would immediately contact authorities, as he was unsure of what his son's intentions were, though nothing would be done about it, leaving the door wide open for Seth's punishments to begin. On the evening of May 2nd, 2018, Seth invited his ex-boyfriend Christopher to his apartment, begging the man to come over and claiming that the CIA was listening to his thoughts. And sensing that Seth was clearly in need of help, Christopher agreed to stop by, a decision that would ultimately backfire, as once together, the two quickly began to argue, leading to an all-out shouting match that soon turned physical. And in a fit of rage, Seth would grab his katana and in an instant begin attacking, slicing Christopher over and over and over again. And as it turns out, Seth's review was in fact accurate, and his katana was certainly capable of killing. The scene would be discovered days later, when maintenance workers were confronted with the carnage in the unit, while on the ground was Christopher's lifeless body. Despite an attempt to flee, Seth Herder was caught soon after inflicting this punishment, and later claimed that it was all done in a fit of delusion. With Christopher having unfortunately been caught in this crossfire, with more victims likely to have followed had it not been for his capture, has given his need to inflict pain onto the world, as well as the concerning items that he had purchased throughout Amazon. Who knows what else he was capable of. It's pretty jarring seeing this man who was once known for his cheerful dancing becoming a convicted killer who will likely never see the outside of a prison again. But throughout the whole case, there's still one question that looms over everything: the dancing. Why did he do it? What was the message behind it all? Well, this would actually be answered by Seth himself during an interview in late 2018, as following his heinous crime, he stated how he believed he was the chosen one and selected by God, but not as some second coming of Jesus or anything like that, but rather, he believed he was the Antichrist, a figure chosen to bring pain and suffering onto the world. And with this mindset, Seth referred to his dancing by saying, "That was me going out in public and demonstrating to people that I was the Antichrist." In his mind, the dancing was a test, and if people took notice, it meant that they were recognizing his powers. And the more they recognized this, the more he believed these powers to be real. Every honk, every shout from a window, every picture taken was ultimately further supporting this man's delusion, pushing him closer and closer to the brink of complete insanity, validating and even feeding these dark thoughts that were consuming him. And the further it drove him to kill, and all the while, no one knew it. They all thought they were being friendly and supporting these lighthearted performances. And darkest of all, this video taken by Kevin Bennett on the morning of February 13th, 2014, the seemingly harmless, wholesome clip from the very beginning, was in all actuality Seth Herder's magnum opus. As between the views it garnered and the newspaper article that stemmed from it, this is what he viewed as the ultimate recognition of his powers, with him even admitting that this was the most overwhelming piece of confirmation in his mind that he was actually the Antichrist, which eventually led him to take the life of an innocent man.
Good. Can you say with me, he grants me according to the riches of his glory? Say that with me. He grants me.
Today was going to be a big day for me. It was my first trip away from home. Love is sweet. Away from home. Love is sweet.
It was a day of celebration for David Turpin and his wife Louise, another in a long line of wedding anniversaries that they'd celebrate by renewing their vows in Vegas. And to make the moment even more special, They were able to do so with their 13 children in attendance. When they first married all the way back in 1985, David was just a 23-year-old man, and Louise was a 16-year-old child. And despite all the years that had passed, it seemed the love they had for each other was still very much blossoming, as they renewed their vows to each other in this same manner practically every year, as shown in other clips scattered across YouTube. And aside from the love they had for each other, these videos also seem to show the love they had for their children, as together, the group seemed to form a massive yet close-knit family unit, known as the Turpin family. And these clips would be just the start of their long trail left here on YouTube. Sometime following these various clips being left across the internet, one of the daughters shown within this old footage would begin uploading videos of her own life to a secret channel that at the time only she knew of. The then 17-year-old's name is Jordan Turpin, and across her page she would post videos of herself singing original songs in her bedroom. While showing incredibly brief glimpses into her home life. And as a whole, these videos seem nothing too out of the ordinary, especially for a 17-year-old girl, with her uploads eventually coming to an end following the posting of yet another singing video. And throughout the channel's lifespan, there really are no obvious red flags that could point to any concerning activity happening behind the scenes, as aside from a few moments here and there, Jordan never really opened up to the camera or revealed any details about her personal life, as for the most part, she only used the page for her music, making it practically impossible to tell that in reality, something unbelievably sinister was transpiring within the walls of the Turpin home, with it having gone unnoticed for years before, and what would have likely been years later, had it not been for the actions of Jordan. As just 1 week after her final upload, a call would be made to 911 from the young lady herself.
This is 911. Do you have an emergency?
I just got away from home because I live in a family of 15. We have abusing parents. Did you hear that? They hit us, they throw us close. They like to throw us across the room. They pull our hair, they yank out our hair. My two little sisters right now are chained up.
In this clip, we hear the audio from Jordan's call to the local police station as she attempts to explain that her parents had not only been abusing her, but all of her siblings as well. Given the severity of the claim, an officer would immediately be sent to meet with Jordan, who had been standing outside in a nearby neighborhood, with the entire interaction being captured on the officer's body camera.
What's going on?
Okay. I just ran away from home.
Okay.
And I live in a family of 15.
Okay.
My two little sisters right now are chained up.
They're chained up?
Yes.
Where are they chained up at?
On the bed. They're chained up because they stole mother's food.
Okay.
But they stole it because they were hungry.
Jordan explains to the officer that two of her siblings were currently chained to their beds, all because they had attempted to steal some of their mother's food. Even more shockingly, Jordan explains that her nervous and oftentimes awkward behavior was due to the fact that she had never really met anyone from the outside world.
I'm sorry if I talk too much. I've never talked to anybody out there, so I've never been alone with a person, so this is very hard for me to talk.
And that in order for her to get help, she literally had to escape from her own home, as she was never allowed to leave.
And when I managed to get out here, this is one of the scariest things I've ever done. I'm terrified.
Initially, the officer was a bit hesitant, even questioning whether Jordan was on medication, to which she responded in a confused manner, due to the fact that she had never even heard that word before.
Do you take any medication?
What's medication?
Medication?
Yeah, what's medication?
Do you take pills? Do you take pills?
And ultimately, the man eventually realizes just how serious the situation was, as Jordan actually came with proof.
I don't have proof of everything, but I have proof that my sister cheated. Look at that. See, those are the places that make you know that. And see how dirty she is? We're so filthy. We don't take baths. We don't.
How did your sisters get like this? Your parents chained them up?
Yes.
The whole ordeal was shocking, though it was only part of the story, as when police entered the home that very night, they discovered the full scope of the abuse that had been taking place within that building. Inside, officers would be greeted with the overwhelming scent of excrement and garbage, which was covering practically the entirety of the house. They would also find 12 other siblings, one of whom had been chained up for weeks, and 2 others that had just recently been freed. The children were malnourished beyond belief and incredibly frail, and much to the shock of the officers, some of them were actually adults, with the oldest being 29 years old, though had been mistakenly believed to be a child, as they had weighed only 89 pounds, due to the fact that the children were only allowed to eat a small amount just once per day. The children were all covered in bruises, which had come from the constant beatings from their parents, while also being covered in filth, as individually the kids were only allowed 1 shower, not per day and not per week, but per year. The abuse that had gone on in the Turpin family home at the hands of both Luis and David was truly unthinkable, with perhaps the most egregious crime being committed by Luis, as on many occasions she was said to have prostituted multiple of her children to wealthy men, all in order to earn more money for the family, while the couple otherwise kept the children locked within the home for the entirety of their lives, torturing them beyond belief, despite the fact that on social media they would post photos portraying them as a perfect loving unit. Which leads me back to the trail of videos left behind on YouTube. For starters, you may be wondering how these children were able to attend these wedding ceremonies if they were truly never allowed to leave the house. Well, these clips actually show what may very well be the only times in these kids' lives that they were ever allowed to leave their home, as once a year they were allowed to go to this ceremony, not as a reward or anything like that, but to disguise the Turpins as being a happy family. This footage quite literally shows some of the only moments of freedom within these children's entire life up until this point. And as for the videos that Jordan had posted to her YouTube channel, well, there's a reason that I said that it was a secret page that only she knew of, because social media or contact from the outside world in any form was strictly prohibited throughout the house. And if her parents had known about this channel, it's likely that she would have faced unimaginable punishment. However, this didn't stop Jordan from uploading these clips, with them likely being a desperate attempt to be heard from anyone else out there in the world that she had forever been kept from. And in many ways, this displays the bravery that Jordan clearly had within her, and the bravery that would eventually lead to her taking the ultimate risk, breaking free of the home and saving her siblings from this torture. And if she hadn't done this, it's likely the kids would have remained imprisoned to this day. The full case of the Turpin family is a rabbit hole far too extensive to fully explain here, but eventually the parents would wind up going to trial, where it would be decided that they would spend the rest of their lives in prison. And though this tragic case has forever left an impact on the 13 children involved, we can at least take some solace in the fact that this torture is over now. Or at least it should have been.
A foster family in Paris has been accused of abusing several foster children, including some of the Turpin siblings.
And what would become the most tragic twist imaginable in a case like this, it was just recently revealed that the foster family who had taken 5 of the Turpin children has now been accused of abusing those very kids. The parents, Marcelino Olgan and Rosa Olgan, along with their son Lenny, are all facing over a dozen charges, including child cruelty, witness intimidation, and false imprisonment. And making matters even more demented is the fact that the father, Marcelino, was additionally charged with performing lewd acts on a minor, as it's been alleged that he actually molested 2 of the children. It is just such a tragic revelation to come from an already sickening case. And the fact that this was able to happen to these kids again is some of the most disheartening news that I have ever occurred. And I hate to leave this video off on such an awful note, so I do want to say that some of the Turpin children have gone on to live their own lives that thankfully have been free of abuse, as Jordan herself has actually become a star on TikTok and is clearly thriving given her newfound freedom. So it isn't all horribly depressing, but some of it sadly is. And I hope that the remaining children can finally be placed in a loving environment, free of the abuse that has plagued their life, quite literally since the moment they were born.
Time for bed, Granny said. Granny tucked me in, kissed me goodnight. Sleep tight, she said.
But I did not sleep tight. I thought about home. And the more I thought, the sadder I felt.
I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons: Alexander Duran, America's Grumpy Uncle, Bazoo42, Biznacker, Bray, Karen S., Daniel Binge, Donovan Aaron, Emmanuel Gamer, Jake Parsons, Jay Money, John Stewart Muller, Joined in Harmony, Catherine Ross, Larry Mattingly, Lacey, Mark PH, Max, Mycrafty Ways, Nathan Backus, Phoenix Morgan, Sam Lutfi, Sorales, Scar77, Skelly, Sub to Micro O, Unblended Corch Noise, Zinsu Sensei, and Trucky Doggo.
Missing Japanese citizens. One night in June 1978, a 22-year-old single mother of 2 kids named Yaiko Taguchi was working her usual shift in Tokyo, Japan's cabaret Hollywood. After shift right at around midnight, Yaiko left the cabaret through the front door and was never seen again. At first, nobody thought that anything serious had happened to Yaiko. In fact, several years later, her manager was questioned, and he claims that everyone thought she had quit when she failed to show up. At around that time, there had been rumors going around that several North Korean spies were working undercover in Japan, looking to abduct innocent citizens and hold them as hostages back in North Korea. However, this was seen by the Japanese government as nothing more than a conspiracy theory that couldn't possibly be true. Sadly, the missing case of Yaiko went cold, and it wasn't until almost a decade later that a clue to her whereabouts emerged following a disturbing chain of events. In November 1987, as South Korea was preparing to host the Olympics in the capital city of Seoul, a Korean Airlines plane blew up in mid-air as it was flying over the Andaman Sea, taking the lives of 115 innocent people. During the investigation, it was revealed that 2 North Korean agents acting under direct orders from the North Korean government had planted a bomb in an overhead storage compartment before getting off at the first layover in Abu Dhabi. As the authorities were closing in on the 2 suspects, one of them took his life with a cyanide-laced cigarette, but the South Korean government was able to arrest the other agent responsible for the attack. During her interrogation, it was revealed that she had been training for that mission for 6 years, and that for 3 of them, she had been paired with Yaiko Taguchi, who had taught her how to speak and act like a Japanese woman so she could fly under the radar. As it was later revealed, Yaiko wasn't the only woman who had been kidnapped by the North Korean government. As of today, 17 Japanese citizens have been officially confirmed by the Japanese government as having been abducted by North Korea from 1977 to 1983. Disturbingly, a lot of them were shamelessly kidnapped in the middle of the day and thrown on a boat to North Korea. You might think that the victims were involved in something shady that put them on the North Korean government's radar, but the investigations actually suggest that most of them were average citizens who just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. One woman was captured while she was walking to a knitting class, and 2 others were kidnapped on a vacation to Europe. Another one, a 13-year-old girl, was taken as she was walking back home from school. Some of these victims were kidnapped for identity theft purposes, while others, like Yaiko, were forcefully brought to North Korea to teach the Japanese language and culture to North Korean spies. After the kidnappings were confirmed beyond the shadow of a doubt, the North Korean government had no choice but to come forward and apologize. But they claimed that only 5 of the 17 kidnapping victims were still alive. Over the next few years, the North Korean government would send what they would claim to be the cremated remains of some of the deceased victims back to Japan. However, as DNA testing would quickly reveal, pretty much all of the remains were fake, leading the Japanese government to believe that many more of the kidnapping victims were still alive. To this day, the North Korean government has stuck to its story, claiming that there were only 13 kidnapping victims and that the ones who were still alive were sent back safely to Japan. Shockingly, while the Japanese government has officially confirmed 17 kidnappings, the list of potential victims suggests that the true number could be as high as 800. Sadly, given the current political situation, it's unlikely we'll ever see the full extent of these abductions, or see the North Korean government held truly accountable for its horrific crimes. Just the other day, I found myself wasting hours of time I could have spent working on videos trying to find and cancel active subscriptions. That's why I've partnered with Rocket Money, the sponsor of this video. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. The favorite feature of mine being canceling subscriptions. It feels like everything has a subscription service these days, making it extremely difficult to keep track of all of them. For example, I used to have a subscription to a clothing brand that charged me monthly to get small discounts. But the monthly fee was help finances today go to FBI and NSA. The majority of the reports included accusations of crimes such as opening and resealing U.S. citizens' private mail for several years and illegally surveilling Black Power activists. Although these claims are obviously pretty serious, they paled in comparison to one particular accusation or conspiracy theory which alleged that the CIA had developed a pistol that could fire a poison dart over 300 feet, take a person's life, and leave absolutely no trace as to the cause of death. As it was later revealed, this theory turned out to be true, and the development of the poison dart gun was just one part of the program called MK Naomi, through which the CIA had sought to develop weapons for biological warfare. In 1975, William Colby, the CIA director at the time, had to testify in front of the committee that was investigating the agency. During questioning, he claimed that the CIA had developed a host of biological weapons as part of a plan to eliminate German leaders during World War II, but that their research had continued until well after the war. He also mentioned that the poison dart gun was almost completely silent on account of the battery that was housed inside the handle, and that it had been specifically designed for the target to feel nothing more than a mosquito bite when the dart struck. Interestingly, the agency had used a specific shellfish toxin to make it impossible for anyone to know what the cause of death was, leading forensic pathologists to believe that the victim had suffered an inexplicable heart attack. It wouldn't help pathologists that the dart was designed to melt inside the body so that it only left a small red mark where it entered the victim. When asked if the heart attack gun, as it was nicknamed, was ever used on anyone, the director alleged that it had only been used for experiments and that there were no records of actual use. As part of the investigation, the CIA had to hand over the gun to the committee, and there are some pretty wild pictures of the committee members analyzing the gun as William Colby answers their questions about it. Normally, you'd expect to see something like the heart attack gun in a spy movie, and it's pretty wild to think that if they hadn't put it under investigation, they would have probably gotten away with using it for who knows what purposes. It's also pretty crazy to think that if that's the kind of stuff they were developing back in the 70s, imagine the kind of technology they have their hands on now. Disturbingly, the hearing was the only time the heart attack gun was ever shown publicly, and to this day, it remains unclear what happened to it after the investigation. Rogue waves. Sailors often get a reputation for making up stuff they claim to have seen during their time out at sea, and because there's no one there to refute their claims, they sometimes get away with some pretty tall tales. For centuries, sailors all around the world had talked about seeing monster waves on the open sea that would allegedly reach over 100 feet in height. In 1826, a French captain claimed that he had seen a 108-foot tall wave in the Indian Ocean. Even though he had 3 sailors with him who backed up his claims, when he came back to the mainland, he was publicly ridiculed by the scientific community, as it was widely believed that it was impossible for a wave to be higher than 30 feet tall. For a long while after that, dozens of people continued to claim sightings of these monstrous waves in the middle of the ocean. But with no real evidence other than eyewitness testimonies, the existence of these waves fell into the urban legend or conspiracy theory category. In the 80s and early 90s, the Draupner platform was set up in the North Sea off the coast of Norway to extract natural gas. As part of the protocol that was carried out to see if the platform was stable enough to withstand the rough seas, a wave height recorder was installed on the platform. On New Year's Day in 1995, the sensor recorded an 84-foot tall wave, which served as the first real piece of evidence for the existence of rogue waves. After this incident, a lot of people started wondering how many of the sailors from previous centuries had been telling the truth. What's more disturbing than that is that there were probably hundreds of disappeared sailors from all around the world who had come across a rogue wave, also known as a monster wave or a freak wave. But because most people who encountered 100-foot tall rogue waves generally didn't live to tell the tale, their testimony went down into the depths of the ocean with them. Since the Draupner wave of 1995, there's been a growing interest in rogue waves brewing in the scientific community. A few years ago, a professor at the Australian National University had estimated that at any given moment, there are 10 rogue waves active in the world's oceans. As of today, a rogue wave is usually defined as a wave that is twice as large as the largest waves that come up in a particular area. And while the root cause of rogue waves continues to be investigated, it's generally accepted that these monster waves appear when two wave crests join together at the exact right time, resulting in a massive wave that can sink even the largest ships and oil rigs. Interestingly, it's also been discovered that rogue waves can take place in large lakes. In 1975, a freighter named the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior under some pretty mysterious circumstances, with a lot of people in the scientific community coming up with all kinds of hypotheses to explain the incident. It wasn't until several years later that the scientists started theorizing that the vessel could have fallen prey to a set of 3 consecutive killer rogue waves, a phenomenon referred to as the Three Sisters, in which the first wave destabilizes the ship, the second wave hits the ship's deck before it can stabilize again, and the third wave overloads the ship with more water than it can take on. If this were true, it could also provide an explanation for the mysterious sinking of other large ships in oceans around the world over the past few centuries, but this might be a bit more difficult to prove.
Robots make additional
Poisonous alcohol. In January 1920, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was successfully ratified, triggering a 13-year period known as Prohibition, during which the